I want to talk about the grassroots era of witchcraft of the 1990s. And I want to talk about how you can't honor the history of magic and the history of witchcraft without honoring the people who were on the front lines with us. So I'm Jacki, and this is the truth about how we got here. I was watching some witch talk reels, and they were scolding the community about authentic magic, and they were gatekeeping the craft. And I gotta tell you, they were coming from people who have the luxury of being public, because people like me spent the 1990s in UU church basements and renting hotel rooms in secret and actually calling each other on landlines just to find out where we could buy some legitimate mugwort, where we could get for real silver pentagrams with long enough chains so we could tuck them inside. And I gotta say, we didn't build this witchcraft movement so it could stay in the shadows. We built it so it could become a standard. One of my big whys in life is to normalize the word witch and the practice of magic. Today on Chats with Aunt Jacki, I want to talk about the grassroots era of witchcraft of the 1990s. And I want to talk about how you can't honor the history of magic and the history of witchcraft without honoring the people who were on the front lines with us. So I'm Jacki Smith, and this is the truth about how we got here. Now, I'm not here to slam anyone who's new to magic and new to witchcraft today. I really love what's going on in the magical community. I love what the newest generations of witches are bringing to the table. I'm really enjoying this expansion of ideas. I really love how free information is right now, how ideas are coming together, and how I can look things up and how I can talk to other practitioners so easy. We've never had it so easy for information. You know, I really wanted to have a stack of my favorite books behind me, of the books that I started with in witchcraft, but unfortunately, when I went to go get them, I realized they have been lifted from my library. I had all of my books at my store when my store was open in this great top shelf that had a rolling ladder, but these books have been lifted from me. They've been stolen, and my faves are gone. And I'm really sad about that. And some of them I've sold recently, but the real faves, they don't exist in my library anymore. I'm thinking about repurchasing them, but maybe not. But I want to tell you about my little altar I have going on today and why I have this going on today. So I do have an ancestor, a short ancestor candle here. And I have, I don't know if you can see this, but I have 3 skull stones, one in amber, one in obsidian, and one in another type of obsidian. It's I can't remember the name of it. You'll probably tell me what the name of it in the comments. But I love having these when I'm talking about the ancestors of witchcraft. I do use these different stones when I am calling in the mighty dead. And I'm going to talk about them a little bit today, or actually I'm going to kind of call them in today and remind myself of the shoulders we stand on. Not only the shoulders that I stand on in magic, the people who were here before me and started this path. And whether I agree with them anymore or not, gosh, they paved the way. They really put themselves out there. They put themselves at risk. They allowed themselves to be ostracized in their community. That risk is what allowed me to learn and to find out that witchcraft was really a thing. When I started my path in the late 80s, early 90s, there really wasn't a lot of books. There was nothing available, very little. There was very few stores. I think there was 2 stores that I could go to in the Detroit area. One had books. Two of them had books. And I called, if you think about it, we were survivalist witches at that time. And there were very few elders in the Detroit community at that time. Most of them were maybe a few years older than me, practicing for longer than I was. And they had their big covens. They had the communities that they were building, the community events. Thank goodness for that. And it was those events, those renting the Unitarian Universalist church basements, where we would gather and we would have our meetups, our round tables. I remember doing a couple of Witches Union meetups where I would rent a hotel room at it was like Nights In or something like that, and I would put posters everywhere saying, "Hey, we're going to have a meetup," because that was back in the day when we had to actually call people and go to bookstores and look for flyers and tear off little things of this is where we're meeting up, and that was pretty risky back in the day. We weren't anonymous and behind keyboards, but we didn't have the luxury of being an aesthetic witch. If you were a witch, if you were practicing this, it was practicing witchcraft. It was the craft of it versus the look of it. I love being able to look like a witch when it's time to look like a witch. It's so much fun to be able to put it on, to decorate my house. And you see behind me, I get to live like a witch in every way. But back in the early 90's, you had to hide it away. And you had to really seek it out. We weren't looking for a vibe at all. We were looking for a lifeline. And you didn't care if the candle was the right shade of green. You just wanted a green candle. And there was no such thing as a pre-dressed scented candle. There was 7-day candles. There were utilitarian candles. There were some shaped candles. Those were at the botanicas or the occult stores. And there was, like I said, there was 2 in the area that had books, and they were at big risk. The one store pretty much started off as kind of a used bookstore, an antiquities bookstore that had an occult flair to it, and then continued to grow as an occult bookstore. But we would spend time there. We stayed to see who else was going to show up, to see who we were going to have a conversation with, who we were going to meet. And we would look for classes in the local area to see, is this a class that maybe somebody like me would show up at? I remember taking a Celtic language class because I loved Celtic magic. And I thought, well, maybe other witch-like people would take a Celtic language class. And sure enough, I'm one of my dearest, bestest friends also took a Celtic language class. And this is where we developed our friendship and continued on from there. I don't remember a thing from that class, but I thought, wow, if I could even pronounce the words, those different Welsh and Celtic words, I would feel closer to it. But we were working hard to just figure out, to get the one little scrap of real, true information. It was like a phone tree. Oh, I learned this thing. I learned how to do this thing. And then we would share it with the next person and the next person. Or this book has legitimate information and you need to read this book and you need to read this book. And we really shared experiences. We really shared how it worked. Oh, this spell worked really well. We had to get to the workings of it. The stores that we shopped in we looked at them as like a lighthouse. We wanted to move out of the shadows, and a lot of us had to be really, really careful. But our dream was to not have to shop in secret. We wanted to not have to look over our shoulders and to practice and to be out and to talk about magic. And, forget about trying to buy a bottle of essential oil. I mean, back in the 90's, if you wanted to buy a bottle of essential oil, you really had to look hard. I mean, even the health food stores were not very prevalent at that time. You had to go out of your way to find a health food store, to find herbs. I remember having to go down to what we call Eastern Market in Detroit to find the herb shop, but they didn't have mugwort at the herb shop. They didn't have essential oils at the herb shop. They had, really good basil and really good thyme and things that you would cook with. But finding the herb shop, which was in the middle of Detroit, and he was an herbalist, and he had tinctures and very few essential oils because he was an herbalist, and he trained in Chinese medicine as well as herbalism. But finding those true herbs. So in Michigan, I mean, we're not on the East Coast or the West Coast. So in the Midwest, there wasn't a lot back in that day. But as things grew, opportunities showed up. And so thinking about those days and what we carved out for ourselves and how many of us took risks. Many of us decided we were going to just create these things. We were going to, I remember different groups of friends, I was going to buy a pound of this. I found a source to buy, let's say, the pound of mugwort. And then we would break it up and share it with each other. This person found the patchouli, the patchouli herb versus patchouli fragrance. And then we shared it with each other, or we sold it to each other. And so this was really that grassroots movement. One of Pat, oh my gosh, I loved her. She had a farm, and we would have the big celebrations on her farm. She would invite us all there, and we would have the big Sabbats on her farm. And I think about this now, and what a risk she took. She's in the middle of the country. And I think about now where that is. And she was really in the middle of a very, very conservative area. So I can't imagine, here is Samhain or here's Beltane and all these cars showing up on her land. And then there's drumming that you can hear across miles. And they're like, what is this crazy woman doing? But it was pretty risky back then to do all of these things. And I love that innocence and that simplicity and that safety in numbers, but we were missing elders. We had to kind of make it up as we go. We had to be there for each other, and we had to learn how to recreate traditions because we were very, very hungry for traditions. We read a lot of books. We learned from different people. We spoke to different people to say, what does a real tradition look like? So we tested what worked and threw out what didn't. And it's kind of why my magic is super practical, because back in 92, if it didn't work, you didn't do it because there really was no backup plan. And also what I find really interesting when I was thinking about this is that if I didn't have a source or a person to talk about this with, to dive into this with, I didn't study it or practice it. Like for instance, sigil work. I love sigil work now. I've been really exploring it and looking at like Solomon's seals and how they work with my magic and how they work within the Akashic records, and how I can work with them with candle magic. Man, it's really powerful stuff, but I did not do that for decades. And I didn't pay attention to it for a long time because back in my early days, I saw some stuff on the Solomon seals and I saw some stuff on the sigil magic, but I didn't have anyone to really talk to about it. No one was as interested in it as I was, and I didn't have books that I trusted. There was a few books, a few pamphlets that I found, but I didn't have good source material to lean in on and say, okay, this is really good information. There were a few books that we could lean in on. I mean, Starhawk was one of a foundational author. Scott Cunningham was a foundational author. The Farrars are foundational authors. Gerald Gardner's a foundational author. Even if you don't follow and concur with their information, they are foundational authors that you can trace back other authors. What they're writing about, you can trace it back. Paul Hewson, you can trace back what people are talking about to what they shared with us. The stuff from the Golden Dawn, Aleister Crowley, all of these things, they are foundational authors, and you can think they were our thought leaders in the witchcraft community. So you can trace these things back to them, and like, for instance, I didn't have anyone who really understood Golden Dawn or the Thelema practice. And so for me to say that I could understand it and follow it, I'm not going to study it because I didn't have the right books that were reputable. I didn't have people I could talk to. So it's not something that I studied at the time. So I leaned into what was available and leaned into it hard, so I could study it deeper and deeper. So if I didn't have the information, we didn't go there. And if I didn't have someone to study with, I didn't go there. But this is the group of people from those late 80s, early 90s that continued this process, that continued into the 2000s, that continued to risk ourselves, that continued to bring this information forward, to share it, then to get it up on the internet, spending all that time putting our books of shadows, all of our information onto the internet. So then you can start Googling it and sourcing it. And now it's interesting. I'll Google something. I'm like, oh yeah, that's from that book. Somebody copied that from that. So a lot of times what's on Google is just regurgitated stuff from books that I've read over and over. So I'm really enjoying some of our newer authors, like Devin Hunter, Matt Oren. They have some really new information that they're bringing out. Oh, I love Laura Tempest Zakharoff. I love how she is taking some standard information and rethinking it in new ways. I love, there's just some people off the top of my head, how they're taking some of the information that we've always known and they're rethinking it and bringing it even into the 21st century and into more, making it even more modern. Because we have come to the place where we have normalized. So why am I talking about this in episode 2 of Chats with Aunt Jackie? Because I think it's really important where we come from. I think it's really important that we understand that no one from the early days of witchcraft started this out to co-opt anything, to steal anything from anyone. We started out hungry. We started out wanting to make it safe for everyone to practice. We started out taking the risks. We're the ones who started to wear our pentagrams on the outside of our work clothes. We're the ones who started talking about crystals at work and putting them on our desks. We're the ones who started doing the things that scared other people, but then having the conversation that said, it's okay. This isn't scary. I started talking about being a witch 30 years ago when I started my candle company. And I would have stores that would say, and clutch their pearls and say, oh my gosh, I can never carry your products because you're a witch. And even 10 years ago or 5 years ago, I had people saying, you use the word witch, so we can't work with you. And I would just laugh. And I would say, that's really sad to me that you're still afraid of this word. Because a witch is somebody who moves energy. A witch is a healer. A witch is someone who is a part of the earth. And it's sad to me that you're still afraid of this word. It's like being afraid of the word healer or minister. It falls in the same category. And I'm very proud of the fact that for 30 years, I continue to call myself a witch. I continue to talk about my candle magic to the masses. I remember not too long ago, I was talking to a group of entrepreneurs at the Treasury Department in Detroit. I mean, like, I was at a reserve, like a Treasury Reserve Center in Detroit, like where they keep money. And we were talking about entrepreneurship and mentorship. And I introduced myself as a witch. And this is what I do. And I remember people coming up to me afterwards actually during, saying, how are you able to be successful and, have tattoos and call yourself a witch and be all this stuff and be out there and be successful? Because, I'm scared of really being myself. And I said, I do it unapologetically, because if I don't do it, then the next person can't do it. So I'm not so worried about being an aesthetic witch. And I'm not so worried about being a survival witch anymore. And I'm not so worried about the people who are going to scold me by potentially being a sellout or making magic to it accessible. Because this is not, magic and witchcraft is not a closed tradition. We are always in a state of evolution, because we are not going to be in the shadows. The shadows are where people get hurt. And we fought to normalize this so the next generation of witches and the next generation can have more safety. And why does this come up for me? Why is it so important that I talk about this? And I hope this bridge makes sense to you guys, because I can't stop thinking about our trans family. And even though not everyone in the trans community is in the magical community, there is a Venn diagram where there's a lot of crossover. But there's an importance in being who you are. And I feel over the past couple of decades, the past 3 decades for myself, it's been very important for me to become who I am. I've been in the place of becoming. And the trans community has taught me that. If I go back to the 80's and the 90's, the trans community has given me permission to be who I am. And even if folks in the trans community haven't been super out in trans, I think about like the non-binary energy of the 80's of like Prince and Adam Ant and Annie Lennox, and how they gave me, and David Bowie, and how they gave me permission to absolutely embrace who I am, no matter who that is, and to embrace that self-creation. There's a shared philosophy of that building your own reality that I see in the trans community, that is that shared space and that shared power. So magic is an act of refusing the reality that you were handed and building a new one. And so I see that a trans person does the same thing. A non-binary person does the same thing. They're performing like the highest form of alchemy when they're turning like that what is into what should be. And they're magic. Folks in the trans community are magic. And I love seeing that transformation of themselves, of them blooming and blossoming and becoming exactly who they need to be. And to me, they're the heart of magic. So I'm very worried. And I'm going to kind of bring this show into this place, that Chats with Aunt Jackie, of I have to talk about what's in my heart. And in my heart is my worry. The attack on the trans community cannot be dismissed. It cannot be looked at lightly. This is real, and I'm very worried about my family in the trans community. And I live in Ferndale, Michigan, and in Ferndale, Michigan, it's a beautiful thing because, and I live right off of the downtown area, like 1 street away. And so I just walk in downtown Ferndale, to get my cup of coffee or my cupcake or whatever. And half the people that work in downtown Ferndale are trans or non-binary. And this is my normal life. And then I leave Ferndale and it's not that way. So this is my normal and it brings me joy. And then I see the fear elsewhere. And it's real. And I'm very worried about what our world is doing to people who are really living what is in their soul. Because in the magical community, we get to live what's in our soul. We get to live our magic, and we get to express it, and we get to talk about magic and teach about magic. And yeah, sure, it's kind of risky, but not nearly as risky as it is in other communities. And I don't want to take that for granted, because it's not that long ago. For me, it was 30 years ago that I remember how risky it was to talk about being magical, to talk about being a witch. And I didn't use that word at the beginning. I would just talk about being spiritual and being meditative and manifesting and things like that. And that was safer than saying the word witch. And I remember that so much, and how scary that was for me. And that's something that I could step away from. I didn't have to live it. It wasn't an identity that I had to suppress to fit in. It was an identity that I had to suppress to feel safe in the world. It was something that I got to do or not do. And I want us to, in the magical community, to remember our trans community is doing maybe this operational integrity work every single day. They're aligning their outer world with their inner truth against like a massive resistance. And really, that's kind of like the highest grade of magic there is. And if your spirituality doesn't have room for that level of transformation, maybe your spirituality is just a hobby. And I hope that your spirituality has that level of transformation for you, and that you and your growth and your happiness is your biggest project, and is your biggest and is your biggest joy. And that doing that and seeing that, you can honor and support and protect these other communities that are doing the same thing. You know, it's been a journey from these early grassroots days to today, to when it's very safe and normal, to when people can go on talk shows and national TV and just, it's normal for them to be a witch, when they can have websites and famous people can talk about being witches and they're not canceled or ostracized. And it's because a lot of us in the 80s and 90s did to make it normal. So I thank all the people who came before me and all the shoulders that I stood on, and the mighty dead who made it possible for us to carry this on. The mighty dead in the magical community, the mighty dead in the LGBTQ community, the mighty dead in all of the activist community that opened the doors and made it okay for us to be here. So, hey, this is Aunt Jackie with Chats for Aunt Jackie. And if you like this show, like and subscribe so other people can see it too. I'm so excited to be here doing this with you and to chat with you and to have other people on the show that I'm going to chat with, my friends. And I will see you next time.